The Sword of Legends. The battlefield was silent, filled with broken armor and rusted machines. Long ago, a great war was fought here, but now only dust and shadows remained. In the middle of the ruins stood a sword, tall and shining, though centuries had passed. Its blade was silver, glowing faintly like the last light of a dying star. No one knew who had placed it there, but everyone in the nearby lands knew its legend. They called it the Sword of Legends. The story said that only a true warrior, pure of heart and unbroken by fear, could claim it. All others who tried were destroyed, their bodies turned into ash by the sword's fire. Brave kings, alien generals, and fearless mercenaries had all come to try, yet none returned alive. So the sword waited, year after year, standing like a silent guardian over the dead ground. One evening, a young man named Kale wandered into the ruins. He was no warrior, not even a fighter. He was simple, a boy from a small village nearby. He came to search for old metal parts to sell in the market. He carried no weapon, only a small bag and tired hands. The people of his village often spoke of the sword, but Kale never believed the stories. To him, it was only a tale to frighten children. But when his eyes fell on the glowing blade, something deep inside him froze. The sword stood in the ground as if waiting. The wind around it moved strangely, whispering like voices he could not understand. Kale stepped closer, his heart beating fast. The air grew heavy, pressing on his chest, but still he walked. His hand shook as he reached forward. Every part of his mind screamed at him to stop. He was no warrior, no soldier, no chosen one. Yet the sword seemed alive, calling his name without sound. When his fingers touched the hilt, the ruins shook. The light of the blade burst into flames of blue and silver. Kale cried out, expecting pain, expecting death. But instead, warmth filled his body. The sword accepted him. Its glow spread through his skin like fire that did not burn. The ground trembled, stones cracked, and echoes rolled across the land. Villagers who were watching from a distance gasped in fear. They had seen many warriors fall in smoke and ashes. But this boy, this ordinary boy, still stood alive. Not only alive, but holding the sword in his hands. The glow wrapped around him like a cloak of light. And for the first time in centuries, the blade sang. Its voice was sharp and deep, heard not with ears but inside the heart. Kale staggered, barely able to lift the sword. It felt heavy, too heavy for his thin arms. Yet when he held it, strength flowed into his muscles. Visions flashed before his eyes, great battles, burning worlds, alien empires rising and falling. He dropped to his knees, gasping, but the sword refused to let go. It clung to him as if his flesh and its metal were bound together. The whispers in the wind grew louder. Some voices were soft and kind, others cruel and sharp. They spoke of destiny, of war, of kings and queens who had failed before him. Kale shouted for them to stop, but the voices only laughed. He was no hero, no savior, just a poor boy with no training. Why would this weapon choose him? Why would it ignore the brave and the strong and reach for the weak? As he struggled to stand, dark clouds gathered above. The sky opened with thunder, lightning striking the ruins. The villagers screamed and ran, but Kale remained trapped. The sword pulled him forward, making him walk though his legs shook. The ground split beneath his feet, revealing ancient symbols glowing in fire. The blade hummed with power, its song echoing through the heavens. At that moment, a shadow appeared on the far side of the battlefield. A tall figure cloaked in black metal, its eyes burning red. It had been watching, waiting for centuries for someone foolish enough to touch the sword. Now it stepped closer, slow and heavy, each movement shaking the earth. Kale froze, the blade in his hands burning brighter. He felt fear like he had never known. The shadow raised its voice, deep and thunderous. At last, it said, "The sword has chosen, but it has chosen wrongly." The words rang through Kale's mind, filling him with terror. but the blade pulsed in his hand, answering with light. The shadow stopped, as if uncertain, and Kale realized with dread the war was not over. The sword had awakened, and so had its enemies. He looked down at the weapon that had bound itself to him. Its glow reflected in his wide, frightened eyes. He whispered to himself, almost in disbelief, "Why me?" But the sword's only answer was silence, heavy and eternal. The burden of power. Kale walked back to his village with the sword still in his hands. He had tried to leave it behind, to throw it on the ground, but the blade refused. Whenever he let go, it floated back into his grip as if bound to his very soul. The villagers who had seen him at the ruins now whispered in fear. Some called him chosen, others cursed him as doomed. They had watched men far greater than him turn to ash. Yet this boy still walked among them, alive. When he returned home, his mother cried at the sight of the shining blade. "Kale," she said, "you must take it away. This sword is cursed. It will bring death to our doors." But Kale shook his head. He did not know how to take it away. The sword was alive, breathing in his hands, humming softly like a heartbeat. At night he lay in bed, but he could not sleep. The weapon whispered to him, filling his dreams with fire, blood, and broken worlds. He woke drenched in sweat, gripping the hilt tightly, afraid that even in his sleep it would not leave him. The next morning, strangers came, tall men with armor of black iron, carrying alien rifles that buzzed with energy. They had heard the sword had awakened. The leader stepped forward, his voice cold and sharp. "Boy," he said, "that weapon belongs to us. Hand it over, and your village will live." The people gasped. Some urged Kale to give it away, others to run. But when Kale tried to release it, the blade clung harder to his hand, burning with blue fire. The mercenaries laughed. "It has chosen him, but he is weak. Take it by force." Kale's heart raced as the enemies raised their weapons. He was no warrior, no fighter, but the sword pulled his body into stance. He felt strength that was not his own. The blade moved with grace, faster than his thoughts. When the first mercenary fired, the sword deflected the shot like light bouncing from a mirror. Kale staggered back, but his arm slashed forward without his will. The soldier fell, his armor cut open like paper. The villagers screamed, half in fear, half in awe. Kale shouted, "Stop! I don't want this. I don't want to fight." But the sword did not listen. It guided him, spun him, struck again and again. Soon the mercenaries lay broken, their weapons scattered on ground. Kale dropped to his knees, shaking. He stared at his hands, stained with the blood of men. He had never killed before, never even raised a fist in anger. But now the sword had forced him into a slaughter. The villagers stayed away from him, their eyes wide with fear. He was no longer the boy they had known. The whispers grew louder in his mind. "You are chosen," the voices said. "You will conquer, you will destroy, you will rise above all." Kale shouted back, "No, I am not a warrior. I am nothing." The voices laughed, filling his skull with their echo. But deep inside, a darker truth began to grow. Maybe he was no longer nothing. Maybe the sword had chosen him for reasons the world could not yet see. That night, he left the village. He could not stay, not with the fear in their eyes, not with the corpses of men lying in the dust. He walked into the wilderness, the sword glowing softly at his side. Every step felt heavier, as if the ground itself resisted him. The stars above seemed colder, sharper, watching him in silence. He felt alone, yet never truly alone, for the sword was always with him, whispering, guiding, binding. But far away, others had felt the awakening. Alien queens, forgotten kings, and warlords across the galaxy turned their eyes toward him. The weapon they had all failed to claim was now in the hands of a boy, and none of them would allow that to stand. Kale did not yet know it, but his journey had only begun. The burden of the sword was not just power, it was war, and war was coming. The first battle. Kale wandered for days, moving from forest to desert, guided only by the whispers of the sword. He had no clear path, no true purpose, but he knew he could not return home. The villagers feared him, and the mercenaries he killed had surely sent word to their masters. The blade burned brighter every night, as if warning him that danger followed close behind. At dawn, Kale reached a small village built near the ruins of an old spaceport. Children played in the sand, while traders shouted in the market. For a moment, Kale felt peace, a taste of the life he once had. But the sword hummed sharply in his hand, vibrating with warning. He knew something was coming, something that would shatter the quiet morning. The sky darkened, and the sound of engines roared above. Strange ships descended, heavy with weapons. From them poured soldiers in dark armor, their helmets glowing red. They carried banners marked with the symbol of a black sun, mercenaries of the Crimson Order. They had hunted the sword for centuries, and now they had found it. The villagers screamed and fled, hiding in homes and cellars. But Kale could not hide. The sword pulled him forward, demanding he face them. The leader of the soldiers stepped out, taller than any man Kale had ever seen. His armor was scarred from countless battles, his voice like thunder. "So," he growled, "the boy chosen by the blade, the weak child who survived where warriors perished." Kale tried to speak, to beg them to leave the villagers unharmed. But before he could, the soldiers opened fire, red bolts tearing through the air. The sword moved faster than Kale's thoughts. It raised his arm, swung with perfect precision, and every bolt of energy bounced away. Sparks lit the air. Villagers watched from the shadows with wide eyes. Kale's heart raced. His body felt alive, yet no longer his own. The blade guided him like a master puppeteer, every slash cutting through metal and flesh. He cried out, "Stop, I don't want this." But the weapon gave him no choice. One soldier charged with a spear crackling with energy. Kale's hand moved. The sword sliced clean through the weapon and the soldier alike. Another lunged with a blade, but Kale twisted, the silver sword flashing brighter. In moments, 3 enemies fell lifeless at his feet. The ground shook as the leader stepped forward. With a roar, he swung a massive hammer, glowing with fire. The impact sent Kale flying back, crashing into stone. Pain seared his body, blood on his lips. The sword hummed angrily, pulling him up again. Kale stumbled, gasping, "I can't do this, I'm not strong enough." But the blade answered with a burst of light, wrapping his body in blue flame. The leader attacked again, the hammer smashing the ground. Dust and fire exploded, but Kale moved within human speed. He leapt forward, guided by the sword's will. Their weapons clashed, sparks raining like falling stars. Villagers watched, praying, fearing, unable to look away. With a final strike, Kale's blade cut through the hammer, shattering it in two. The enemy staggered, shocked, but Kale's arm moved before he could stop it. The sword pierced through the leader's chest, glowing brighter than ever. The giant fell with a roar, the sound echoing through the ruined port. Silence followed, broken only by Kale's ragged breath. He dropped to his knees, the sword still burning in his hands. The villagers emerged slowly, eyes wide with awe and terror. Some whispered that he was their savior, others that he was a curse. Kale shook his head, tears in his eyes. He had won, but it was not his victory. It was the sword's victory, and he was only its prisoner. Far away, across the stars, others felt the shift in power. The sword had awakened fully, spilling blood once more. Alien queens, warlords, and forgotten kings turned their gaze toward the boy. And Kale, trembling in the dust, realized this was only the first battle. The real war was still to come. The alien queen's warning. The night after the battle, Kale sat by a dying fire. His body ached, his mind spun with fear and guilt. The sword rested across his lap, glowing softly, as if it were alive and watching him. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the faces of the soldiers he had killed. He whispered, "Why me? Why would you choose me?" But the sword gave no answer, only a silent hum, deep and endless. As the stars turned above, the air around him shifted. A strange chill swept across the ruined spaceport. The villagers had gone into hiding, but Kale felt he was no longer alone. A shadow glided across the sky, silver and vast. A ship unlike any he had ever seen descended slowly, without sound. Its surface shimmered like glass and moonlight, bending the stars around it. Kale stood, his heart pounding, the sword in his hand pulsing with warning. From the ship stepped a tall figure, elegant and terrible. Her skin was pale like ice, her eyes bright as burning emeralds. She wore armor that flowed like silk, yet gleamed like steel. Behind her walked attendants with masks of bone, silent and watchful. The villagers hiding in the ruins gasped in terror, for they knew her name. She was Queen Seraphis, ruler of the Ilarian dominion, a conqueror feared across 100 worlds, yet also keeper of ancient secrets. Kale gripped the sword tightly, but she raised her hand. "Peace, child." Her voice was calm, deep, echoing as if spoken by many at once. "I did not come to kill you. Not yet." She moved closer, her gaze fixed on the blade. "So, it is true. The sword has awakened, and it has chosen you." Kale tried to speak, but his throat was dry. He forced the words out. "Take it, please. I don't want it." The queen's lips curved in a small smile, both cruel and sad. "You think it is yours to give, but you do not understand. The sword does not follow you. You follow it." She circled him slowly, her attendants whispering in their strange tongue. Her eyes never left the sword. "Do you know what you hold?" she asked. Kale shook his head. "Only that it kills." Seraphis nodded, her expression sharp. "Yes, it kills, but more than that, it judges, it chooses, and it binds." She lifted her hand, and for a moment the sword trembled in Kale's grip. The glow flickered as if recognizing her presence. She whispered, "This blade once belonged to the Eternal Warrior, a man who united galaxies with fire and fear. He commanded empires, and worlds bowed to him. But when his heart turned dark, the sword abandoned him. It left his hand and waited for another." Kale's eyes widened. "And now me?" The queen studied him with a gaze like cold flame. "Yes, you, the weakest boy, the one with no training, no bloodline, no crown, and yet the sword clings to you like a lover." Her voice dropped lower, sharp and warning. "Do not mistake this for a gift, child. It is a burden, and it will break you if you are not careful." Kale's hands shook, the sword heavy as stone. "Then tell me what to do," he begged. "Tell me how to rid myself of it." But the queen's eyes softened, almost pitying. "You cannot. Not until your destiny is complete. And whether that destiny is to save or to destroy, only the sword knows." The villagers watched in silence, hidden in shadows. They had feared Kale before, but now they feared him even more. For if even the great Queen Seraphis spoke of him with warning, what would come next? The queen turned back toward her ship, her attendants following. But before she left, she paused, her voice carrying across the ruins like thunder. "Remember this, boy," she said. "Every empire in the galaxy felt the moment you touched the sword. They will come for you. They will hunt you. And they will not stop. You're no longer a boy from a village. You are the chosen of the blade. And that makes you the most dangerous soul alive." With that, she ascended into her silver ship, which vanished into the night sky. Kale stood alone in the dust, the sword humming against his skin. His chest was heavy with dread, his mind full of questions he could not answer. He whispered, "Most dangerous soul alive." The words felt like chains tightening around him. He looked at the glowing blade, and for the first time, he feared not just the enemies who would come, but the weapon in his own hands. The trials of fire. Kale left the ruined port behind, the queen's words echoing in his mind. "You are the most dangerous soul alive," she had said, and the weight of those words crushed him with every step. The sword pulsed at his side, glowing faintly as if it breathed. He wanted to throw it away, to bury it deep in the earth, but no matter how hard he tried, it returned to his hand. It was not his prisoner, he was its. Days passed as he walked into the barren lands, dry earth stretching endlessly beneath burning skies. At night, the sword whispered in his dreams, visions of fire and war flooding his mind. He saw cities burning, alien armies kneeling, worlds shattering into ash. When he woke, his hands trembled, afraid that one day those visions would become real. Then, one evening, the ground beneath him split apart. Flames burst from the cracks, and a voice deeper than thunder filled the air. "You carry my blade," it said, "but you are unworthy. You must be tested, you must be broken, or you will destroy all you touch." The earth opened wider, pulling Kale into a cavern of molten stone. The sword glowed brighter, not in warning, but in hunger, as if it had been waiting for this. Inside the cavern, pillars of fire rose like walls. Shadows twisted in the heat, forming shapes of warriors, beasts, and faces from Kale's past. The voice spoke again. "3 trials you must endure, the trial of flesh, the trial of spirit, the trial of blood." Kale's chest tightened. He whispered, "I can't," but the sword hummed, dragging him forward. The first trial came quickly. A beast of fire emerged, taller than the trees, with claws of molten rock and eyes like suns. It roared, shaking the cavern, and charged. Kale stumbled back, gripping the sword with trembling hands. The blade moved on its own, striking, cutting through flame and stone. But the beast reformed again and again, each time stronger. Kale realized the sword could not win by power alone. He closed his eyes, listened to the rhythm of its hum, and found the single beat of weakness within the creature's chest. With one desperate strike, he pierced its heart of flame, and the beast vanished in smoke. The second trial rose from silence. His mother stood before him, her eyes filled with sorrow. "You killed men, Kale. You brought death to your home," she said, her voice trembling. Behind her, villagers appeared, faces twisted in fear and anger. He dropped the sword, falling to his knees, tears burning his eyes. "I never wanted this," he cried. "I never asked for this." But the illusion of his mother reached out, touching his face gently, then turned to ash. The voice thundered. "The burden of spirit is heavier than steel. Carry it or be crushed." Kale picked up the sword again, his hands weak but steady. The final trial came, and it was the cruelest of all. From the fire stepped a figure in black armor, tall and broad. It was Kale himself, but older, darker, his eyes glowing red. The other Kale raised a sword identical to his own and said, "This is what you will become, a tyrant, a destroyer, a monster." Kale's heart pounded, his breath shallow. They clashed steel against steel, light against shadow. Every strike was his own. Every cut was a wound in his soul. The fight seemed endless, sparks filling the cavern like stars. The dark Kale laughed. "You cannot kill me because I am you." Kale's strength began to fade, his arms heavy, his body failing. But then he remembered the words of the queen, the whispers of the villagers, the cries of the dying soldiers. He shouted, "I am not you. I will not be you." With one final surge, he drove the sword into his darker self. The shadow screamed, shattered, and dissolved into the flames. The cavern fell silent, the fire dimming. The voice spoke once more, softer now. "You have endured, but trials never end. The blade has accepted your will, yet it hungers still. Beware its call, for it will tempt you again." Kale collapsed on the stone, gasping, the sword glowing quietly beside him. He had survived, but at a cost. His heart felt older, heavier, no longer the heart of a boy. As the cavern closed and the night returned, Kale whispered to himself, "This sword will either save me or destroy me." The betrayal. Kale left the cavern of fire with heavy steps. The trials had scarred him, not on his skin, but in his soul. He felt stronger, yes, but also emptier, carrying a weight that no one else could see. The sword lay at his side, silent now, as if watching him quietly, waiting for the moment he would falter. Days turned into weeks as Kale moved from world to world, hiding in ruins, running from hunters. Everywhere he went, whispers of his name followed. Some called him savior, Others called him Curse. He longed for a voice of comfort, a friend who would not fear him. And then he found one. In the shadow of an abandoned fortress, Kale met Darren, a wanderer like himself, carrying scars of many battles but eyes that seemed kind. Darren offered him food, water, and words Kale had not heard in so long. "You're not alone, boy," he said. "I know what it's like to carry a burden too heavy for your back." Kale's chest loosened. For the first time in months, he smiled. Together they traveled, fought side by side, and shared stories under broken stars. Kale began to believe that maybe he had found a brother, someone he could trust. But the sword never slept, and its whispers grew uneasy whenever Darren was near. Kale tried to ignore it, telling himself that the blade was only jealous, only cruel. Yet shadows seemed to follow them, hunters arriving wherever they stopped. Kale began to wonder, how did the enemy always know where he was? One night, as they camped in the ruins of a temple, Kale awoke to voices. He rose quietly and followed the sound. There, in the moonlight, Darren stood speaking to a figure cloaked in black. Kale's heart froze as he heard the words. "The boy trusts me completely," Darren said. "Soon I'll lead him to the council. They'll have the sword in their hands." The cloaked figure nodded. "See that you do. The queen has her eye on him, but others want him dead." Kale staggered back, his breath sharp, the weight of betrayal heavier than any blade. He wanted to believe it was a lie, a trick of his ears. But when he stepped into the light, Darren turned, guilt flashing in his eyes. Kale's voice broke. "Why, Darren? Why would you do this?" Darren lowered his head, his voice quiet but steady. "You are too dangerous, Kale. The sword will consume you. I thought I could save you by delivering it to those who might control it." Kale's hand shook, the sword humming angrily at his side. "You betrayed me," he whispered, his voice cracked with sorrow more than rage. Darren's eyes glistened with pain. "I betrayed the sword, not you. Can't you see? It is already turning you into a killer." Kale shouted, "I trusted you." The night shook as the sword flared with blue fire, pulling him into stance. Darren drew his own blade, his face torn between regret and determination. Their fight was fast and brutal. Steel clashed with sparks, every strike ringing like thunder in the night. Kale's heart screamed at him to stop, but the sword pushed harder, hungrier. Darren fought with skill, but the living blade was stronger. In moments, Kale disarmed him. The glowing edge pressed against his throat. Tears filled Kale's eyes. "Don't make me do this." Darren closed his eyes, whispering, "Then don't. Prove you are still stronger than the weapon you carry." Kale trembled, the sword screaming in his hands. It wanted blood. It wanted the betrayal answered with death. But Kale dropped to his knees, forcing the blade into the dirt. His chest heaved, his voice shaking. "No, I will not be your monster," he whispered to the sword. The glow dimmed, but Kale knew it was not defeated, only waiting. The whispers faded into silence, heavy and cold. When Kale looked up, Darren was gone, vanished into the night. The emptiness of his absence felt like another wound. Kale stared at the stars above, his heart broken, his trust shattered. He whispered to himself, "If I cannot even trust a friend, how will I survive what is coming?" The sword gave no answer, but deep inside Kale knew this betrayal was only the beginning. Greater treacheries, greater wars, and greater choices still lay ahead. The chosen warrior. The night of betrayal left Kale broken, his heart heavier than his blade. Yet the sword did not allow him to rest. Its whispers grew sharper, warning him of a storm gathering across the stars. The Crimson Order, the Illyrian Dominion, and countless warlords had united for one reason: the boy with the living sword. Across the horizon, skies burned as fleets descended. Warships hovered like black clouds, their weapons glowing. The villagers and wanderers below screamed, running for shelter. Kale stood alone on the edge of the battlefield, the sword pulsing like a heart of fire in his hands. He whispered, "I never wanted this," his voice trembling. But then his eyes hardened. "Yet it has chosen me, and I cannot run." The ground shook as enemy soldiers poured across the plain. Thousands of armored warriors, beasts chained in iron, machines of war rolling forward. Kale's knees trembled, his breath shallow, but the sword flared with blinding light. It was no longer dragging him into battle. It was waiting, asking. For the first time, Kale lifted the blade not as a prisoner, but as its partner. "I will fight," he said, "but I will fight as myself." The first wave struck, and Kale moved. The sword sang with every swing, a sound sharp and endless. Energy bolts shattered, blades broke, the earth itself cracked under the power of their clash. The villagers watched in awe, a boy they once feared, now standing like a storm against an army. He was not perfect, his strikes clumsy at times, his body bruised and bloodied, but his will was his own, and the sword obeyed, not controlled. The enemy unleashed their champions, towering generals with weapons forged from dying suns. Kale met them one by one, his blade carving light into the darkness. Each fight pushed him to the edge, yet he refused to surrender. The sword glowed brighter, not because it led him, but because it followed him. Together they struck down giants, beasts, and machines. Every clash echoed through the galaxy, a cry that the Chosen had risen. Finally, the sky itself opened as the last ship descended. From it stepped the cloaked figure Kale had seen since the beginning. Eyes of burning red, voice like thunder. "At last, the child of the blade stands before me," it said. Kale gripped the sword tightly, his chest rising with fire. "I am no child," he answered. "I am the one it chose." Their battle shook the world, light and shadow colliding. The figure's strikes were relentless. Each blow meant to crush Kale's spirit. But Kale stood firm, every step heavier, every strike stronger. He no longer fought to survive. He fought to protect, to prove he was more than destiny's pawn. At last, with a roar, he drove the sword through the enemy's chest. The shadow burst apart, scattering into the sky like smoke. Silence fell, broken only by Kale's ragged breath. The armies fled, the war machines burned, the ground soaked in fire and ash. The villagers stepped forward slowly, their eyes wide. Some whispered his name with fear, others with hope. Kale lowered the blade, its glow soft now, like the calm after a storm. He looked at the sword, his voice low. "You want a warrior, but you chose me instead." For a moment, the blade pulsed warmly, as if answering. Kale smiled faintly, though his eyes carried sorrow. "I'm not your master, and you're not my prison. We walk together as one." Far above, in the endless sky, the stars seemed brighter. But Kale knew this was not the end, only the beginning. For the sword whispered once more, not in hunger, not in command, but in promise. "You are not the last I will choose. Our journey has only begun." Kale turned toward the horizon, his figure small yet unbroken. The boy who was once nothing now walked as the chosen warrior, not because the sword demanded it, but because he had decided it himself.